Breaking news, apparently one of the heads of American comics, in particular DC Comics, you may have heard of them, they're the same company that distributes Superman and Batman. Well, essentially, they had to recently admit something major regarding manga, well, essentially destroying them, so to speak, basically coming out on top beyond words, because it's no secret over the last few years that anime and manga as a whole has beyond measure become one of the most dominant forces in the entertainment industry. It's not that long ago that we got the announcement of Demon Slayer essentially outdoing majority of Hollywood, including the Superman live action film, in terms of revenue at the very least. And over the last few years in general, anime has become such a staple in manga sales, despite not being quite what they were during, of course, the C19, so to speak. Essentially, manga is still outdoing the comic industry, so much so that one of the heads at DC Comics had to come out and admit it and give a little bit of insight into it. So yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that, and also what it is about anime and manga in general, because I guess I also want to ask before we even get started, what is your opinion on why anime and manga has been outdoing the comic industry over the last several years? Oh, but before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button and that bell so you can get all my videos. It helps for you to be notified on time when I put these things out, and it helps for me to be able to tell you what's going on in the world of anime and manga. And I guess for this one in particular, what's going on as far as them dominating the competition, because it seems like over the last few years, it's really just been not only, of course, the surgence of anime and manga hitting mainstream like never before, which a large part of that I would attribute to basically the whole merger of Sony and Crunchyroll and all of that aspect. But even more so in general, it's the time that this medium has finally come to be able to, well, get what it rightfully deserves in terms of success and acclaim globally. But then that begs the question, of course, well, what has changed? Why is it that not only on the anime side of things, but also on the manga side of things, why is manga outdoing comics, and why in general Japan has the proverbial foot over the neck of DC Comics, Marvel Comics, and the comic industry as a whole? So let's read what he had to say. DC Comics boss admits manga has a major advantage over Western comics. The president of DC Comics has revealed what Japanese manga and anime do better than Western comics, noting how comics have a lot to learn from their overseas counterparts. Speaking about Japanese manga and anime, Lee said the stories coming out of Japan are quote-unquote incredibly powerful, adding that he often finds himself wondering what is missing in Western comics and why aren't they able to achieve the same flavor. He pointed to the genre concentration of American comics as a key disadvantage, explaining that manga has an advantage over American comics, which are mostly about superheroes, and that's where the majority of sales and readers are concentrated. Lee contrasted that with Japan's approach, where manga is treated like mainstream literature and encompasses a wide variety of genres. It's not just hero stories, there's a much wider range of genres, like stories about cooking and soccer. You can draw stories from that. So I'm very happy that manga has been so successful, because it gives me a goal to aim for. Which, once again, when you get a statement like that from the head of DC Comics, because make no mistake about it, when it comes to the comic book industry in the West, it's DC and Marvel at the top of everything, and of course there's others that are on the rise, but those are the major players when it comes to Western comics. So when one of the heads of one of the two Goliaths in the West is saying basically like, yo, manga is whipping our behinds right now, and I'm trying to figure out why, is because, yeah, Japan has been doing its thing, and Japan has just been dominating. And honestly, there's a wide variety of reasons why anime and manga has really been just doing it up, so to speak, in regards to, you know, the success that is maintained. One of which, just look at that statement that I said right there, anime and manga. The format that anime and manga has been traditionally using for a while now, that's honestly just catapulted with everything that's transpired over the last few years, is a format that works very well, starting off with the source material, whether it be, you know, a light novel or a manga, but for the most part, you know, we're talking about manga here. It introduces this brand new readership to this brand new story, and immediately, if the story continues onward, builds a core fan base before it actually even gets out to the mainstream. Like, think about it. Imagine an artist, for example, a musician, having a fan base before they actually even get a record deal. That's normally how they get the biggest deal. That's normally how they get the biggest push from their record execs. That's normally why a record label even seeks out independent artists nowadays, because they kind of have something going. They have a buzz generating, so to speak. And it's the same concept that they've been applying over there in Japan with manga, where they put out a series. In particular, let's take an example, Shonen Jump, and while they're very harsh with it, we know that they will cancel a series in a heartbeat if it's not doing what they wanted to do within the first 10 to 15 chapters. But ultimately, if it makes it past that threshold, which again, if you think about it, they even have parameters already in place. Like, this is a system that is tried and true and works. It makes it past that first year of serialization, and at that point, if the fan base is decent enough, strong enough, which they don't even really want it to be like what it used to be back then. Like, you know, several years ago, you really had to be doing crazy amounts of sales to actually get to that point point of getting an anime adaptation. Nowadays, you could be doing decent amount of numbers and still get that push. And when I say decent, like again, back in the days, you had to have been doing like already, 50,000 to 100,000 for them to give you, that anime adaptation. Nowadays, there's series for like 20,000 sales, 15,000 sales, that suddenly they get this massive boost and boom, they become a big success. So take that into account. Your manga already has a fan base, it's on the rise, and then suddenly it gets a multi-million-dollar anime project that gets pushed globally, whether it be on platforms like Netflix, Crunchyroll, all of the big players. And then now it already has this core fan base. It adds on top of that a new fan base of eyes that maybe had no idea about the manga or had no idea that the manga industry even exists. And so now you have a successful project with people that have already been supporting the manga to begin with, and on top of that, a whole new audience that has been introduced to this source material that may go back and pick up those volumes. I'm sure there's plenty of people that can agree with me that when you've gotten into something and suddenly you're like, yo, oh my gosh, I want to know more of what happens. Because that's another thing. They traditionally, at the very least in the beginning of a lot of these series, will have it that the manga is still ongoing even after the first season of the anime. So a lot of people, they'll watch the first season of an anime, they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is so freaking incredible, I don't want to wait for the next season. There's a comic that actually goes on. Some people might be like, oh, I don't know about comics, but that's even how you introduce new fans to the medium to begin with, of people that is like, they're so interested in this one story in particular that they check out the actual manga, and next thing you know, they do that a few more times and boom, they're like, yo, I actually love manga. And if it keeps going long enough, it becomes a global phenomenon sensation, and right there you have a recipe for making something that becomes, well, a success. While on the comic side of things, not so much. For example, despite the fact that you have these major global films such as the Superman live actions or the Batman live actions, are they necessarily going to trickle down to comic readers? Considering the fact that majority of these stories, while they're loosely based off comics, they still kind of take many liberties and oftentimes go their own routes for, a suspenseful reveal. And for the most part, outside of the logo of like from DC Comics, from Marvel Comics, they rarely promote or push the fact that, hey, you should read the comics for more, or hey, you should get into the comics because of this. I think a lot of the times DC Comics expects just like, hey, because it's Batman, hey, because it's Superman, people are gonna go read more comics, or at the very least they've thought that, because by now you gotta know that that's not really the case, considering the fact that those are some of the mascots, and even then they're still not able to compete with the Goliaths over there in Japan. Lack of availability, that's another thing. Like, I think they've actually started to kind of push comics in other areas and other avenues that they weren't readily available before, so that's a good start. Japan has been doing that for like a quadrillion years, where you go to your local 7-Eleven and you can pick up an issue of Weekly Shonen Jump. Why did I say 7-Eleven? And then of course, one of the major things that just is honestly a bit confusing, I would say, for most people that actually even want to attempt to get into comics, and I think this is a widely spread fact, but for those who don't know, when it comes to manga, let's just say you want to get into Naruto, One Piece, or Bleach, the only way essentially to get into the comic version of it, the manga, is via the first chapter, volume 1. Like, sure, you could go if you want to pick up volume 33 or something along the lines of that, but for the most part, if you want to start the journey from the beginning, you pick up the first volume, the first chapter. With Marvel and DC, there is like a quadrillion different versions, hence why you got stuff like Into the Spider-Verse and all that, where there's like a quadrillion Spider-Mans. A lot of episodic things without continuity. It's just like, where do I begin? What's connected to what? How to, like, I think confusion, while sometimes a little bit of confusion could kind of build for suspense in terms of market selection, is like, bruh, what do I do? Which again, I want to give credit where it's due. I do believe that the absolute verse that they've recently created in DC Comics, with like Absolute Joker, Batman, and things like that, has garnered some interest. So there's potential there. But ultimately, it just feels like a lot of what manga does right and anime does right is that they have a system. They have a roadmap, so to speak, on how to make things go. Again, it is very competitive over there in Japan. Make no mistake about it. If your series ain't popping very quickly, they get you out of the magazine. But they got a formula that works. I think DC, Marvel, and the Western comic industry needs to find a formula that not only promotes their latest films, but also gives back to the original creators, gives back to the source material. It would help if the latest Deadpool film, if the latest Spider-Man, the latest Superman, the latest Batman, when people go and watch that film, they go back and buy the comic that is associated with that. But people aren't going to do that because most of the time there's not really a specific comic that goes with it. Readily available access isn't really there. DC Comics and Marvel need to kind of come up with a system, and one that actually gives back to the original creators. And don't get me wrong, anime and manga is not perfect. In recent times, we have discussed some of the mistakes that they've made in terms of boosting the anime, which has kind of been somewhat detrimental to manga sales, but it's still working, and it's clear as day when you got articles like this that one of the higher higher-ups of DC Comics admitting that manga's crushing it. Curious what you guys think about this though. What do you think is the reasoning why manga and anime is just annihilating comics in the West? And what do you think they could do to fix this? That's all I have for this one. I'm Tim. As always, people, have an awesome day. Peace in.